So welcome back to Orca Boats. I'm Rod. We're working on the PT11 and this is episode 20. So over the next couple of days in this episode I'll be installing the breasthook, then allowing that epoxy to set and fiberglass it. I'll be running fillets around some of the parts inside, cutting the skeg box and reinforcing that with some fiberglass pieces. Then there'll be some fiberglassing of some edges, sealing some holes, some miscellaneous parts, and then fiberglassing the tops of the outwales and the top of the inwale at the transom. So the first thing I'm going to tackle with the boat upside down is to route out the centerboard trunk box with a flush cutting bit bearing on the bottom and just following the trunk box itself with my laminate trimmer, and then take some sandpaper and clean it all up. The corners need to be squared off, whereas the router can really only do a small round corner. So we need to square these up so we can insert small pieces of fiberglass stripping provided in the kit, just cutting it to length. We're going to do the bottom of the boat. It also goes on the top of the box as well. Just cut it with a hacksaw. Make sure they all fit inside. So with all the pieces cut, we're just going to tape them in place with some thickened epoxy and let that set up. Time to install the deck. So I've sanded the inside edge here for a bond. I have beveled the edges as much as possible for a pretty good fit, other than a bit of fillers, and then added some unthickened epoxy onto the bare wood. Now we're just going to put on some thickened epoxy and put it in place. There'll also be a fillet on the underside once this cures, so we just need to hold it in place at the moment. I know there's a bit more of a gap up in the very tip in the bow area, so I'm going to add a bit more epoxy there, and I'll even add some to the surface here just to make sure we have enough. So it's going to go level with the sides. Not putting too much pressure on there, otherwise it's just going to want to slide right up on me. It's a bit tricky because it just wants to slide about as I clamp it. I'm going to add some hot glue sticks to this in a minute. Just wanted to get it in place. So we can't have it up too high, otherwise when I go to sand this area, I'll sand through that top veneer of the deck piece. And I'm just going to clean up the excess. Push it into any gaps. So I've used a faster setting hardener on here as we're trying to progress on this build a little faster, so anywhere it's not going to be a clear coat finish, then I can just use the 205 hardener. Then I can move on to filleting the edges of the forward seat and the hull wall itself. I am just epoxy coating some smaller parts. So just got them up on little blocks here. The undersides don't need to be done because most of these will be glued down So we'll coat them when it comes time to glue them on, and then add some thickened epoxy. So all I've done is driven a couple of small nails into the pieces, and then the suggestion was to hot glue these little nail heads down to scrap pieces of wood. However, in hindsight, the heads on my little finishing nails are not that large, therefore they do not wish to stay attached to these very blocks. It's very easy to kind of break them off of there. So in hindsight, I think it would have been easier to actually just drive the nails right through the scrap pieces of plywood and then tack them into the pieces. Now on these ones, the Orlock blocks, it's a little better. Kind of hot glued some drywall screws down, but then they have a larger head on them, so these are a little sturdier. So we're going to try and get a couple of coats on here today. I'm just going to glass the edge of the bulkhead. Just rolled on, brushed on, rolled out a bit of epoxy, and I've cut a 6-ounce piece of glass, more than wide and long enough than needed. Just kind of stick that down there. And very carefully just tab some epoxy on here. I'll use the roller to smooth it out, but the roller's just, if the glass is too dry, the roller's just going to grab it and peel it off. It looks like the plywood is still sucking up some of the epoxy, so I'm going to need to just add a bit more in certain areas that look very dry. Just let it soak up what it wants. Once I'm sure the glass and wood will not absorb anymore, then I will come back and remove the excess with roller or dryer brush. I think we've got it all on there now. Let's see if we can see. That's what I was afraid of. It's just going to grab that piece of glass. I think I'll avoid the roller for now and just pay attention to this for a while. Epoxy is probably going to run down into certain areas and pool, like there, and just take it off. And by the next day, and the epoxy hardened on the breasthook, I can take my block plane and grind down the excess on the stem that sticks up and bring it down level to the breasthook itself without digging into the breasthook. The rest will just be cleaned up with sandpaper, and then we're ready to glass it. By putting a bunch of masking tape on the areas that you don't want to be sanding into, this makes it easier to block sand the areas you do want to, and you'll notice that if you're beginning to grind into with masking tape, you're coming a bit too close. Right now I'm just going to sand down the outwales, flush with the deck, getting rid of all of the epoxy that's on there, and eventually we can remove the masking tape and clean it up. Because this area will have a bright finish, we need to get rid of all of the blobs of epoxy on the surface without digging into the layers of veneer on the deck. All of these shadow areas will be seen if I don't remove them now. And the final sanding of all of the top edges, deck, tops of the gunnels can be done with my orbital sander, being careful not to sort of roll the sander over edges and dig into corners. So I'm just going to sand the top side. I need to sand on the inside, although it's been sanded, there's a bit of fingerprints of epoxy here and there. So I'm just going to get rid of those so we can apply glass. And because the glass will need to wrap down inside the boat, I'm just going to round over the corner with my laminate trimmer, bead cutting corner bit. And to get rid of any burn marks left by the router, I'm just going to hand sand everything and we're ready for fiberglass. And the first step today in glassing is going to be just reinforcing this corner edge on the bulkhead end of the forward section. Just put some masking tape on there so I don't have epoxy running down, but also I'm going to trim the glass when it's green by just cutting along the tape and get a nice clean edge. Can't have a little excess epoxy in this area because the two bulkheads need to mate up very nicely together. So here in the transom inwell, I'm just going to dab on a whole bunch of epoxy, which I will roll out. But again, small pieces like this, rollers just tend to grab and pull. So the idea is I'm going to stick this down, roll it out. It's got to wrap around down the inside face and just extend past the transom itself. We're going to wrap it down the outside because the outside will be glassed later with a heavier piece of glass on the outside of the transom. So once I'm comfortable that this is all kind of stuck down here and there's enough epoxy, then I'll come back with a roller and we'll push it all down and remove any excess. So the real trick is to get it to fold down inside. So we just again try and get it to stick on there with some dabs. Scrape off some epoxy. The end grain will soak up a little bit extra, but we can always come back and add some more. So today's project is get this transom inwale glassed in, the deck glassed in, and the top of the outwales all glassed in, and then wrap down the inside of the boat. So there's 4-ounce glass on the transom here, 4-ounce on the forward breast hook or deck, whichever you prefer to call it, and there'll be 6-ounce wide strips coming down the inwales, or sorry, the outwales, and wrapping to the inside of the boat. So I think we've got a good amount of epoxy on there now. Had to cut a few little slits in the here to come into the sculling notch. I think I've got a good amount of epoxy there now. Grab the roller. The roller's dry right now, so I'm not going to press too hard. Once the roller starts to saturate, then it does its job. So it's nice because the roller is especially the dry roller is picking up any excess epoxy that I've puddled onto there, and I can dispose of it in a drier area. Okay, that's all down. Let's see if we can get it to fold onto the corner edge here and down inside. Certainly not going to try and wrap it underneath. We're not going to get it to manage to do that, but that's not really necessary. So with that, I'll move on to the outwales. So I'm just going to brush some epoxy on here. That just gets it on the surface so I can roll it out. Then I'll add the strips of epoxy, or sorry, fiberglass after it's wet. And we're going to go down inside, so I'll make sure that's wet in there. Of course, this has all been sanded. It's all roughened up for the bond. And this piece will come right back over the gusset here. So these gussets are mighty strong. They have been glassed. This will be the third layer of glass over these gussets that have to support the weight of holding the boat together. So now we got that on there. Just smooth it out by rolling. I don't want it running down inside. Nice thin coat. We'll go get the piece of glass. So we just stick it down there and then fold it down onto the inside. Adding more epoxy. 6-ounce glass is going to take more. So brush a liberal amount on here. It's not going to be necessary to wet the piece of glass all the way down the inside. 1, I'm just going to pick up annoying strands, and 2, we can sand it smooth later and recoat. So really just down about 1/2 inch or so should strengthen the bond between outwales and the hull. So now I got it good and wet. I'm going to come back with my roller and push it all down. So as I roll to the end, I kind of roll excess away from the center. And rolling the inside edge, trying not to grab strands on the roller, and fold this whole piece of glass up. And that's good for one side. I'll come back and clean that up. So with the first gunnel edge done, just moving on to the other side of the stern section, and then following that I'll do the 2 gunnels on the bow section. Okay, I've let it all soak in as much as I can. The roller I had was pretty saturated and was making a sloppy mess, so what I'm going to do now is I've got a dry piece of roller on here which will nicely pick up excess epoxy and flatten down like that. We don't want to catch strands. We'll force the glass on. We can kind of pick up any drips mess here. And the last piece of glass to go on the boat today will be on the breasthooks, this little piece of 4-ounce. I've cut some pleats in the edges. This is going to saturate on the top and then fold down the inside face, but not rolling under the deck. And with all the glass and epoxy on the boat today in the video, I will come back in 3 to 4 hours, recoat these areas, let it sit for 24 to 48 hours while I work on other areas, then resand all of this, grinding down edges, and recoat. And as always, thanks for tuning in. If you wish to become a subscriber, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Maybe click that bell and that'll notify you of updates on this build and other builds going on in the shop.